All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's February 23rd, 2022. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team and then showing them the ropes. If that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to book a session with me and get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format's very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. We'll automatically post a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy the content and want to support it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, that's youtube.com/cloudposse. So with that said, let's kick it off. I have a number of announcements from the past week here. The first one was AWS announcing general availability for AWS backups of S3 itself. So if you need to construct a custom policy of how you're backing up assets in S3, this would be one way of doing that. Now, I don't necessarily know immediately some of the use cases of it. I guess it would be multi-region backups, specifically within S3. Obviously, with versioning, you have built-in forms of backups. I guess this would be a way of maybe taking more like a snapshot at a point in time of a bucket for your backups.
It could also be, Eric, it could also be kind of a CYA thing if you have customers that are like, what about backing up those files? And they don't want to hear about yes.
Exactly. I think that could be more the answer here. Sometimes, if it doesn't say the word backup, you can explain it 100 different ways, and then the customer or the vendor or your partner or whatever asks, so tell me about backups though. How are you doing backups? That's what I was just explaining. No, okay, now you can actually just say, yeah, we check off the box. We have AWS backups. All good. All right. Oh, well, okay. So there are other things though with that you get with AWS backups, of course. You get the vaults, and then that can make sure that you have a totally immutable record that can't be modified. Checks and balances, right? So now you have these backups going into a vault that is managed by a separate team that has their own access credentials that you have no ability to affect. So I could see from a compliance standpoint as well, backups fulfilling a role beyond just versioning of buckets and artifacts. AWS Firewall Manager, small update there. Basically, previously when you were enabling rules, they were always pinned to the latest version and automatically updating, which is inconvenient when you have unexplainable errors happening at the edge or wherever your WAF is configured. So now you can pin to a specific version, select when your updates happen to your WAF rules, so you can make that correspond with whatever metrics you have if there's a spike in errors or 401s. This announcement, from AWS perspective, this was more an announcement that there's a new community for QuickSight. I thought the more interesting part of this announcement was, this looks like Discourse to me. And I think there's an interesting trend maybe within Amazon, recognizing that there's a strong desire for more community, possibly around the products, and that the AWS forums are abysmal, matching tech from 2005 maybe. So adopting something like Discourse for the forums seems like a good call. It's also a trend that's been tried and true. Many other communities or platforms have done it. GitHub, Discuss. GitHub uses Discourse as well for the GitHub community. So does sweetops, but we haven't really been promoting it. All right. any other interest? Have you guys seen more communities popping up around by Amazon, for Amazon on Discourse? Because this was the first one I saw that caught my eye. I guess Amazon wants to get a little bit more control over the content. You know, tired of everyone just going to Stack Exchange and finding their answers. Auto adjusting budgets. On the one side, this seems like an oxymoron or something that what we set a budget, why should it auto adjust? I mean, the whole purpose of a budget is to set our limits of what we want and not have it change under our feet. But I think there's a strong case to be made why you might like this. And what, for example, you know, in a ever evolving infrastructure where you're deploying new services, you have a gradual increase of your spend over time. That's probably more palatable to the business. And what you're more concerned about are spikes. So if you could just have a baseline that is continuously or adjusting based on your overall usage for some configurable period of time, and then be notified if you have just a rapid increase, basically the delta, the change, then be notified. That's what this is addressing. And I think that's a practical way of setting limits. So you don't necessarily know what your limits are today. You just want to be, let me know if something radical changes. We talked last week about some of the pains of the new Terraform provider for AWS version 4.0 that made some painful but necessary changes to how S3 buckets are managed, among other resources. We did pull the Band-Aid off and we made those updates. We cut a pre-release for right now, since we don't really know what the total impact of this is going to be. That pre-release is available as 0.48.0. We also put some notes together in the wiki corresponding to this repo with some notes here to follow on how to upgrade. Any feedback is welcome, and be advised that this is a breaking change forced upon us by basically changes in the provider, and there's really nothing we could do to make this any less painful. Last announcement is crowdsourcing of advisories for GitHub. So, you know, GitHub has these security advisories built into the platform. It's an opt-in feature where per repository, you can check if you want to receive the advisory notices. GitHub has had their own sources for that. I don't know more than that. I'm sure it's published somewhere how they get them and how it's maintained. They do now accept contributions from the public. And you can basically find any advisory and then add details to it, you know, other systems or things that it might affect. I actually, when I read this first, it was that okay, so two things. I guess you can open a PR to contribute advisories, and then this is a way to somehow enrich that data with other things that it affects. Where was it? I forgot where. It took me a little while following the links the first time where to find it. So I don't remember where it was now. At first, I thought there was a new feature related to GitHub workflows that you could actually have users submit a workflow, but they're overloading the term workflow. And there's this, when you find with the advisory, there's this link here on the lower right side you can click on and you get this form. It looks like this. All right, that's all the announcements I got. Anyone else have something interesting to bring up?
Yes, this weighted feature now S3 bucket support event bridge as like a notification or event, I guess. So now think of possibilities that you can use. In the old time, we were using CloudTrail to investigate an event on S3 bucket, but now S3 like less than 1 month support event bridge. So yeah, that can be triggered to anything else, like uploading a file you want to.
Oh, very nice.
Or something like that. Yeah.
I can't believe that wasn't there before. So this is an alternative to using like SQS for S3 bucket events. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good announcement. Any other announcements? Terraform adjacent, AWS adjacent, GitHub Actions adjacent.
We got some EKS version expert EOLs coming up in like March and April. I think that's 19 and 20 in March and April, respectively.
Yeah, that's important to be on top of. At which point they can force a platform upgrade at their whim. The other one was March 20. No, when was it? Yeah, 1.22 drops in March here. Thought I saw a specific date yesterday, but I don't see it right now. March 31st, 1.18, end of life support. 1.19 in June. Yeah. Yep, those were good announcements. Anything else? By the way, 1.21 to 1.22 will be a pretty painful change as many deprecations become removals. So make sure that you are getting caught up at least to 121 so that you can start prepping your apps for those removals, redeploy them, and then be ready for 1.22 upgrades. All right, no more announcements. Cool, we'll move into Q&A. You know, something just hit me this week. Yeah, it's not the first time it's hit me, but sometimes it just feels like what we do at the lower level in the trenches with DevOps feels like building sandcastles. And we're trying to build these robust, stable systems that are future-proofed. Charlie, no, sorry about that. That are future-proofed and will stand the test of time. But it doesn't matter what we do, we're keeping all of our Terraform modules up to date. Yes, our sandcastle is going to stay strong. Oh, wait, no, Terraform's not the thing anymore. Now it's Pulumi or whatever. I don't know. But it just like, no matter what we do, we can't foresee all the ways the landscape is going to change, that it's just constantly evolving. What we do at Cloud Posse today resembles almost nothing about what we were doing back in 2015 when we started. When we started, we were recommending Prometheus, Grafana, self-hosted on Kubernetes or at COPS at that time. We don't do any of those things anymore. We just use Datadog and EKS, and the customers that were on COPS had to eventually migrate. It didn't matter how amazing or robust we made those templates for COPS and how we deployed it. It was worth nothing in the end because we don't use it anymore. And it's only 5 years later. So anyone else want to ruminate on this?
One thing that I have found in this job I've had like two years last week, the guy that our architect is who I inherited a lot of this stuff from. And at a certain point, and this is like, we're all in AWS, it's EKS, we're using SQS, RDS, bunch of S's, a bunch, all that stuff. Very little actual infrastructure besides our nodes. But one of the things that became apparent to me was that he was really adhered to the vanilla rule, and doing a lot of the infrastructure is not like jury rigged and configured up the wazoo. We've done, gone to some lengths to make sure that things are as vanilla as possible. So there's less of that kind of like, karma to resolve going forward.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about AWS itself, they're probably the lesser evil in this whole equation. Unlike Google, they keep their services around forever. They've had a few minor deprecations through the years, but all in all, it's been pretty stable in terms of interfaces. Our pain comes from using Terraform and Terraform providers and techniques for deploying on AWS, and that's what's constantly evolving. Andy Miguel had a good point when I brought this up earlier, and he says, but let's be clear that this is at the lower levels, this is really where it's evident. But high level, the patterns of architecture have actually been pretty stable. Conceptually, we're still using load balancers. Conceptually, even if we're using Kubernetes, we're still having these things called pods, which are just abstracted nodes. So that even if you're using Kubernetes, architecturally, things are still the same, high level. So yeah, it's the infantry that suffers.
Yeah, there's got to be a logical fallacy to it. It's like the shining city on a hilltop where you just think all these things are going to be so much easier and better. And then you actually get into the day-to-day grind of supporting whatever it is you built. And it's just like the last thing. It's just a different flavor of it.
Yeah.
Like in a way, it's more like rather than building a city on a hill, it's kind of like, building a city in Japan. Like, because like Japan is known for a lot of earthquakes, right? So the way they design when you buy a house, for example, in Japan, you just tear it down right away because you know it has problems. Last earthquake. So no, that's just how it is there. You buy the land.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah.
And so like I think that's kind of we're in a similar kind of boat because no matter what you build, 5-10 years from now, it's gonna be just yesterday's tech. You're gonna hear some junior come in mocking you for what you built 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're gonna be okay with it because that's why we get into this business, because we like to stay ahead of the bleeding edge and we like to learn things all the time.
Maybe
it never gets old.
Maybe
a
new term of ephemeral technology, like we have
ephemeral
infrastructure.
Ephemeral best practices.
Very true. I like the best thing we do for ourselves is to set up partitions in the right places, right? Load balancers being one. The separating teams into like having their own AWS account, for example. That's one approach that also helps kind of like it's scope.
That's a good point.
Managing scope. It's one of the best things we could do for ourselves.
Yeah.
Didn't Kelsey Hightower have a hot take on this a while ago about like what people were doing with microservices and how many anti-pattern and so he was advocating for actually start bundling stuff back together in a tongue-in-cheek way, but
yeah. Well, this is the great bundling and unbundling that we see in software businesses and services. It's just how everything goes. Build and recreate, or build and destroy and recreate. All right, that's a good one. All right, next question was from Sam Lem. I don't know if he's on office hours, actually. This was a question posted in the sweetops community in the AWS channel this past week. And the question was, why is it from a compliance and operations standpoint, a best practice to put all S3 buckets into their own AWS project? And I think he means like a AWS account. And he's asking because it sort of breaks the Terraform mold of working with app-specific buckets where you normally put them under the dev prod account, et cetera. And I have a few thoughts on this one, and it's come up a number of times, and we've revisited this year a couple times as part of our implementation. And the answer is obviously always, well, it depends, but let me give you some material to work on. The first consideration is using SCPs and S3 buckets. So the problem fundamentally with S3 buckets is it's a very easy way to accidentally leak data. And there's probably 100 examples and embarrassing mix-ups where this has happened, from massive databases leaked out by contractors working on some stuff that was stuffed in an S3 bucket, bank accounts, phone numbers, credit card information, God forbid, Bitcoin wallets and all that other stuff. So the way to safeguard this is a few ways. One is obviously Amazon has made it a lot easier to prevent making buckets public. And besides having just feature flags on the bucket resources themselves, you can set service control policies at the organizational level that apply on the organizational unit or the accounts, making it impossible for somebody to even try to misconfigure something either nefariously or accidentally. So this eliminates, I like this because it just eliminates a whole class of problem. So I don't disagree with this idea that you should have dev, staging, prod, buckets, perhaps, depending on your application. We'll get to that in a second. But if this eliminates a whole class of problems, well, one best practice might outweigh the other. Now, the other thing is that you can still have dev, staging, prod, buckets in that same split, or have different dev, staging, prod artifact accounts or public accounts that you do that in, so you simulate the same outcomes. Similar to S3 buckets is like artifacts or like ECR images or repos. I think one of our newly adopted best practices for this is to create like a public account or a public artifacts account, which is where you would stick any resources or assets that you intend to be public, so that it's blatantly clear to the organization what is public and what is not, and that you can have control policies on everything else and alerts on everything else. So that would be, in a nutshell, my thinking on that. Anyone have something to add? The other interesting thing I'd like to point out is from the release engineering perspective on these buckets, and it's an internal debacle I've had on the recommendations we make for customers. We like to break everything into multiple AWS accounts. I think our standard reference architecture deploys 12 or 14 different AWS accounts. And with some of the directions headed with account factories for Terraform and control tower users, you probably are going to blow that number way up to 50 to 100 accounts pretty easily based on how that's designed. My point now is with CICD. I think one of the best practices out there is that when you create an artifact as part of like merging to main, that is the same exact artifact that gets promoted through, dev, staging, and production. And if we had different S3 buckets or different ECR repos, one in every account, well, first of all, now that complicates our pipelines. We got to come up with the orchestration to pull the image and push the image and that whole rigmarole just to enforce this separation of the buckets. And the other problem is that what I see all too often happen is that companies end up just rebuilding the artifact for dev, or rebuilding the artifact for staging, or rebuilding the artifact for prod, and that's what we want to avoid. So more and more, I've started to like this idea of a centralized artifactory store for everything. And it breaks that best practice that we said about keeping everything separated, dev, staging, prod. So I don't know, thoughts that this is, I guess, more of a conversation point. How do you guys live with this and reconcile the split?
Oh, I don't know about other people. For me, production houses are ECR repositories. That's just where we push it. And I suppose you could have a meta account if you wanted to do that. But then we're not a particularly large company, but we do have several teams working on different projects, right? If I were to have, I wouldn't want to have one meta account for a company. That seems like madness, because what then happens is nobody's responsible for it, or somebody is responsible for it and they're tyrannical about it, meaning the controls are too tight to actually be able to effectively use it. So I'd really want to keep the alignment between keep the people who need access, make sure that they have the access. And for us, that means putting it in production and then just recycling that artifact between staging.
Yeah, we've seen that practice used as well. Well, because it's basically relegating it to, how do I say it in the correct way? Basically, if it touches production, then it is production, whether or not it's used in dev, staging, or elsewhere. So the highest stage in order that it affects.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I had to add on that. Another question that was asked in the AWS channel this past week was just, is anyone using SSM Session Manager to enable devs to connect to an RDS staging database, not using SSH keys and connections managed through SSM? And I thought this was an interesting question because to me, the entire purpose of Session Manager was to eliminate the SSH keys, right? It's to use IAM authentication to authenticate. And my understanding is SSM Session Manager only works with EC2s or ECS pods. I don't know if it works with like EKS pod. I said ECS pods, but ECS tasks. I don't know if it works with EKS pods. I don't think so. And I don't think you can use SSM Session Manager directly to RDS. But there are tools out there that make port forwarding really easy. Now, this blog post here shows kind of like the hard way of doing it, just using the AWS CLI. But if you use one of the many different tools out there, like this one by Clarinet, now I don't know if it's still, it looks like it's been abandoned, but still works. We still use it. This makes port forwarding very easy and SSMing very easy into instances because you can just install this CLI and then run a command, list the nodes that are connected via the agent. You can do port forwarding via that node kind of as a jump host and then connect to your RDS instances that way. Anyone know for sure? I mean, am I wrong? Can you connect directly to RDS through SSM Session Manager? I don't think so yet.
I don't think so, but I think that RDS proxy does allow you to do that with IAM permission meeting.
Yeah, but your RDS proxy would still, I mean, but how do you connect to the RDS proxy, which should also be in your VPC and not publicly accessible?
Right. Well, two separate problems, right? Well, we're using Bastion host. I mean, look, you can you could just set up a VPN into your VPC. Yeah. We have a Bastion host, and my new guy was just a little while ago was like, hey, let's check out Instance Connect. And Instance Connect is pretty straightforward. Based on your IAM user permissions, it allows you to essentially put a key up into an instance for like 60 seconds so that you can authenticate. That was the next step approach. We're still trying to get people to adhere to standard SSH configs and AWS configs because we've got like 10 client accounts and they should all be set up the same, but I can't herd these cats into configuring stuff.
Well, so what's interesting is you can actually set up SSH over SSM as well and use IAM, I believe, so that you can maybe bridge the gap that way. I know there's like you can set up a SSH config rule or something that will shell out to the AWS CLI.
Great.
For those of you who haven't seen, we do have a Terraform module that provisions a simple EC2 Bastion server with by default, no SSH access, which is because we can leverage SSM. So this is an easy way to start using this today and get immediate benefit.
So with SSM, you can configure. Can you do a more central configuration of port mapping and stuff like that, or is it just configuration of the authorization and the elimination of the need for SSH?
It is the latter. Yeah. Controlling like per tunnel, controlling what it can or cannot connect to is not an easy task. I believe there's some things you can do on the server side with the SSH config to limit what ports you can forward to, but I also seem to recall that it's easily bypassed too. So I wouldn't even bother with that unless you can deploy like a dedicated EC2 instance per connection group that you need to support, and then use security groups to enforce it. This is obviously where tools like StrongDM and Zscaler come in as being able to present more fine-grained access controls, but both of those are commercial tools.
We also have to think about the firewall rules for those things. And it'd be nice if that could be dynamic and you could use this in a break glass kind of sense.
Oh, but that's the thing. There are no this instance is entirely in a VPC with no public access. End of story.
Just goes to the AWS API.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay.
Yeah, you just have to have the VPC endpoints.
Yeah, trying to get users to configure stuff. You can write as many bots as you want to generate config files.
This CLI is so easy though. The SSHM CLI, it's in Go. You can distribute it via Jamf or however you do, binary distributions. You're obviously using GD6 since you like Cloud Posse, joking. But we do distribute it as a Cloud Posse package as well, so it's easily installable. There's Python versions of the same tooling. I just prefer the Go-based packages since it's a single binary cross-compiled.
There's another one called Go SSM.
Yes, yeah, Go SSM is the other one.
Yeah, I find its user experience better.
Okay. And looks like it's more actively maintained
Yeah,
as of 4 months ago. Yeah, that's nice with the autocomplete like that. That's slick. And all of these tools are designed to make it easier for the port forwarding. Oh, and look at that, brew install.
Yeah, exactly.
Winner chicken.
It's easy to tell everybody to install it and just work.
So yeah,
For what it's worth, in case it's not said, because it's not known, ECS exec is also available. If you have ECS containers that you want to connect to.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
For databases, we use an identity hour proxy like Pumerium, if you know it.
Mhm.
It integrates with Cognito or SSO. Pumerium, it's called Pumerium.
Yeah, Miri,
And it have you can have a CLI that you can log in. Like the CLI will prompt you to the browser, and you can log in with your SSO, and it will do the port forwarding based on your group.
Yeah. How is Pumerium to get up and running? Do you find it pretty easy?
Yeah, we host Pumerium inside our Kubernetes cluster, so it is already inside the network, but and it is exposed publicly, but it is like aware of our SSO.
Is it as easy as deploying a single Helm chart and passing it some SAML
Yeah,
metadata? Okay, that's cool.
it also has some Kubernetes operators that you can assign. You don't have to configure Pumerium itself for every new database you have. You can have like a CRD with the configuration and the groups that you need, that you allow to access this database, or not exactly a database, like literally anything. And you don't have teams can whitelist specific groups in their Helm charts and have everything without you as an operator or as an administrator to have to whitelist specific groups.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. Any questions in the office hours Slack here? Ray Myers, were you able to find the discussion that we had last week on how to think about fine-grained permissions and pipelines for continuous delivery on Terraform? Maybe Ray didn't make it. All right. Well, I'll turn it over. Let's any questions in the Zoom chat? Nope. All right. Open floor. Anyone? Interesting projects you're working on? Questions, challenges?
I can have a discussion about how do you give different teams the ability to define alerts and Prometheus alerts, to be specific. What platform did everyone build? Because I have this specific setup that I'm trying to build, but I'm having to open different pull requests to different components so I can get it complete. So mainly we use a Prometheus operator, and like teams will have like a place in the Helm, like using their Helm charts, like define the Prometheus rules and define all the like centralize, define all the labels and like specific labels that we set up from our platform. And we have like, they can define their own rules, and we have the default platform rules that like do a lot of joins to these specific labels and send to specific channels or and some stuff like this. So it is very custom made. So I was just curious about how do you build your observability platform or alerting platform and make it accessible to the teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before I jump in and answer anything, somebody else want to chime in?
Also, I don't mean the infrastructure alerts. This is easily done with Terraform. I mainly talking about the application level alerts.
Yeah. So I think there are two approaches to this, or two degrees or layers of this. I think that if one approached it entirely generically, that it would be doing a disservice to most developers in building and releasing services. While if one was too opinionated and only allowed canned monitors to work, it would be too restrictive for those apps that actually, or those developers actually know how to leverage it to the max and want to be able to alert on other custom metrics and so forth. So my approach or recommendation would be a hybrid. And I assume you're using, what is it, alert rules or the custom resource within Prometheus to define?
Yeah, Prometheus rule. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this pattern is similar, can be supported with Datadog as well. And let me help break it down here. So, hold on. So I love to reference the Cloud Posse big picture here. And when we are talking about implementing monitors, there are, first of all, several layers. You have monitors that are operating at the infrastructure level, at the platform level, like overall Kubernetes health and availability and capacity, and any SLIs related to that. You have your shared services, like your GitHub action runners and so forth. And then finally, the applications. So from a scope question here, I think that we're only talking about the layer 4 here, and how applications deployed, custom applications by your company are deployed and monitored by developers. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. So then the next recommendation comes up, and that is how you deliver your applications. And our standard pattern for that would be to have a set of charts. We have typically called it the mono chart, but we acknowledge that you might have more than one of these. But it's kind of defining your deployment interface to Kubernetes. So you're not saying that any app can be deployed in any way to Kubernetes. You're saying we have a few patterns that we support, and if you don't fit into one of these patterns, well, let's talk about it first before implementing it. So if we were lined up to that point, then you'll see maybe where I'm going is that when you implement that mono chart, I think that it should come out of the box with supporting the most common types of monitors for that application. Health check time, health check responsiveness, overall API responsiveness, any sort of crash looping or CPU notifications, CPU alerts, and you can nail probably, it's the 80-20 thing. You can probably nail 80% of the monitors you need for your apps with 20% of the effort, and standardize that in that mono chart.
Yeah, this is how I have it done. Like,
okay, perfect.
Like standard labels. So, you will just like label different deployments and different like stateful sets based on their like how critical they are. And I have like a set of standard Prometheus rules that will do a lot of lots of joins, like really lots of joins, to filter different labels and send to the right Slack channel or the right notification channel. The rest is the 20%. The 20% left is the really custom metrics, like not like a pod crashing, like metrics based on the application metrics itself, like the Prometheus metrics that the application emits.
Can you describe a little bit more though? So about how are you using those joins and deciding the Slack channels, and
yeah,
are you doing that entirely within Prometheus? Okay.
Yeah, this is a complex port. So in the cube state metrics exporter, you have a metric called cube pod label, which has nothing but all the labels on the pod, or the labels that you whitelist. And then like I can do like, so if I am trying to find a pod is crashing, not only like I do a query for the crashing pods, like I do a query for the crashing pod and join it with all the labels, or join it with the specific labels. And I have a label for like how critical the service is, and the label for the Slack channel. And when I join these together, I get like a metric for pods that is crashing, that exists, that belongs to this specific label, like the Kubernetes, like app.kubernetes.io label, plus how critical it is, plus its Slack channel. And then I send all these labels to Alert Manager, and it will do the routing.
Okay. Yeah. Now, when you describe it that way, that seems pretty similar to our recommended approach. Obviously, we're using different tools. We're using Datadog and Opsgenie. But our pattern is similar. We've standardized on a set of tags that must, or labels that must be present. So tags, if we're talking like AWS resources, labels, if we're talking Kubernetes, the tags we've standard on are team that owns the service, the name of the service, and the app that it's a part of. And then what we escalate on specifically are only things that are P1s or P2s. So what's interesting about this is that the service or the alert is what determines that it's a P1 or P2. You don't put that logic anywhere else. And then what you do is for your, in your case, I guess, Alert Manager, the escalation piece is all it knows what to do is, hey, I see a P1, I know what to do. I send it to this channel.
Yeah, exactly.
I see it. Yeah, exactly. And it creates those layers and makes it much easier to kind of get the pieces to fit together.
Yeah, and it fits like 80% of the needed alerts.
And then you know what I would do about the power users, the extreme use case is I would just present an escape hatch that allows a raw custom resource to be bundled together with that deployment, and that makes everyone happy.
Yeah. I try to eliminate the need for the joins. So the joins are really annoying when you have like multiple labels. Like if I need 3 or 4 labels, the query becomes very big, and it adds pressure to the Prometheus server. So I have an open pull request for the cube state metrics repository to like be able to have like specific labels on the metrics themselves, not having to do joins. So every metric series in Kubernetes has its own like I can whitelist about 3 labels or something and have them in each metric series. So I can just filter with the name of the pod or the name of the label without having to do joins at all. Makes everything simpler.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump into the next question. Wendy Yuri is asking here, I'm looking for examples to build a VPC without an internet connection, without losing connection to ECRS3 DynamoDB. So if I'm to put this or reframe it in my own words, you want to kind of build a VPC that's sort of air gapped, meaning that it can only connect to specific internal AWS services and has no outside connectivity. Is that an accurate summary, Yuri? Okay, and Yuri responds in chat and says yes. So a couple things that I would do. I mean, you're going to need to establish the VPC endpoints for each one of those servers. so services, so that the VPC can connect to them. And then I would establish a NACL, a network ACL, that just precludes flat out any connections outside of the network ranges that you tolerate. You would make sure there's no such thing as a NAT gateway deployed, which will also preclude any easy traversal out to the internet, and no internet gateways as well. And well, before you embark on any of that, you're going to have to deploy some kind of a CI system or CD system that will allow you to manage that, that network. So, you know, whether that be implemented with code build or GitHub action runners deployed in a VPC that is paired with it, you're going to need some way to remotely manage and connect to that. And doing that with Terraform is going to be the challenge if you don't have that. Let's see what, yeah, and Yuri can only participate on chat. Cost, I would anticipate, well, nothing about this architecture would be more expensive than making a public one. It's just going to be a much, I would have concerns for the customer around cost if I was the consultant implementing it, just because it would be harder to design. But the operating cost should actually be lower because you don't have things like NAT gateways. NAT gateways, by the way, are Amazon's ATM machines. You deploy them once per subnet, and it just prints money for Amazon. All right. Kevin Mahoney says, thanks for all the SSM SSH suggestions. Greatly appreciated. I'll dig into Go SSM, SSHM, and Pomerium. Let's see. There was another question here. I felt like Eric Berg says, related to a question earlier of how you set different thresholds for different environments, deployments of the same monitor. Oh, how do you set thresholds for different environments, deployments for the same monitor, multi-monitors, and have?
It's a Datadog thing.
A Datadog thing, yeah. So I forget if you are using our Datadog platform module and if it was related to that.
I am not.
Okay, because if you were, we just have some updates on how to do that more efficiently, so that you can just basically override thresholds per environment, but by default, it all inherits and deep merges from a set of defaults per monitor.
But you're deploying separate monitors to each environment, right?
Yeah, so we are the monitor. Well, okay, so first of all, Datadog and how you architect it, there's multiple questions there. Datadog supports organizations much the way that Amazon calls them member accounts or child accounts. So you could be using multiple Datadog accounts, much like you have multiple AWS accounts, but there are trade-offs with that. So are you using multiple Datadog accounts or a single Datadog account?
So one Datadog account that
monitors,
all the client accounts and, our DevOps global accounts.
Exactly.
Well, the way we did it was, basically this is when I spent time looking at your locals.tf files and, learned, this is when I felt the real pain of flattening. So basically I've got an environments file, I've got a directory of monitor definitions in YAML, with some defaults kept, and then I kind of just merge them together and create separate monitors for each environment, because in many cases they need different thresholds. And I actually was talking to some of the product managers over at Datadog monitoring and logging guys about this. And they're like, why aren't you using multi-monitors? And I was like, A, B, C, and D, like just doesn't fit, can't do it. Help me out. I'm happy to, but yeah, that's how we do it. Separate monitors. And, there are some trade-offs, but it's cleaner.
I would say it's the right way to go for multiple reasons, because the monitors themselves are infrastructure at this stage. And I would say the people who are you possibly in some organizations, larger organizations, even have checks and balances on that. So you'd be releasing changes to the monitors first in dev, and then then staging, and then production. And I think that's why you wouldn't want to change them all at once. And even if there was a monitor that could handle multiple environments like that, I don't think that's maybe what we want.
Yeah, and especially with Datadog too, if you use a multi-monitor for something that's like pretty generic that all like a lot of teams are using, then you have to design custom routing rules like in your monitor alert
Yes.
message, and it gets weird pretty quickly.
Priorities.
I'm with you. Yeah, I do like though that it's nice to be able to like templatize a certain alert message format. Um, but I think that's just one of those things you just have to take off out of band and just like preach as opposed to dictate through some sort of templating system.
There's also a distinction between like infrastructure monitors for, like cert expiration. For the other stuff, like we based the priority is set, you can override it in the monitor, but it's basically set based on the environment at this point. And we've had talks about, scaling it within the environment. But, those are all deployed to the individual environments. Sorry, I think I lost your point there, Jim. But anyway, yeah, sorry about that.
So that reminds me, though, that was a question you asked a month or two ago about monitoring SSL. What did you end up coming up with? What was your solution?
With the few domains that we have, and confirming that auto, really like a half dozen, and confirming that the auto renew is on, was really where we wound up with that. We've got, that this is just for like our corp certs and stuff like that, DNS certs. So all the stuff in AWS is like automatically updated. So that's cool. So it's just a couple of outliers and we're just going to rely on auto renew.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. So there's symptomatic monitoring, like where you can just monitor like the effect of the certificate, but then you can actually just make sure it doesn't happen to begin with by having those things set up correctly. So any other questions here? I think we are almost out of questions or out of time.
I wanted to share something silly I did.
Yeah, go for it, Patrick.
I created like a Terraform to spin up a WireGuard to spin up like different exit nodes in different regions using different cloud providers. And the idea was you could just specify a region, your authentication for the individual provider, and then it automatically spins up the server, sets up WireGuard on the server, and outputs your client config for WireGuard. So literally you just hit apply, boom, within 3 minutes, you got a config, plop it in. You could change the region and then hit reapply, like within like 3 minutes, you got a different config, plop it in, spin it up. But it started with me just wanting to watch a TV show in Canada that I couldn't watch in the US.
Okay.
But and I did it for AWS and DigitalOcean. Then I got carried away, and I literally just went to HashiCorp and I found every cloud provider that was worth anything, and I implemented it separately in like all the different cloud providers. But I thought it was interesting because it's also an
and you signed up for an account at every one of those cloud providers?
Yeah, so yes, I did. But most of them, yeah, I'm gonna actually rotate my credit card next month.
I was going to say,
but most of them offer free tiers. So that's like a ton of free VPN, and since it's so easy, I spin one up when I want to watch a show. And when I'm done watching the show, I spin it down. And
WireGuard VPNs on demand, just in time.
But it's
connected
also,
to your RSS feed and Zapier.
Not a bad example of like spinning up just a basic EC2 with each cloud service too.
That's cool. Definitely share that. I'm sure it'll be a fun thing for others to take a look at.
Yeah, I was bored. I get lonely and bored. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else have some interesting projects they've been working on similar to Patrick?
We just got our space burst staging deploy automated to space lift with no interaction by me. after 2 years. So we're not using your module, Eric.
You're
I've
lost.
got-
That's fine.
Yeah, well, it's not for lack of trying, but we can talk about that. Yeah, got a module for multi-stack. So it's like similar stacks applying to all of the client, all 10 of our clients, and then individual stacks. So I could just drop YAMLs in there now, and things are looking good. It was very exciting. I swear to God, they were like, I was like, just cut the PR the way you always do. And when you merge it this time, it's just going to happen. My heart was like racing, like all 2 years of like, no, your PRs must be like this. We're going to automate this. And it paid off. Like yesterday, we actually got that going. And today I can look back and see what the plan looks like because it's persisted. You know what I mean? It's good. I'm happy. And it's been fun to work with those guys too.
Yeah, they're super responsive. You see, we also have a Spacelift channel in sweetops. They're pretty responsive and monitoring that. So that's cool. So awesome. Well, we are out of time for today. Thanks everyone for sharing. Sorry, Eric, for those problems you had getting that module set up. You should reach out to me. We'll wrap things up here. Let me get back to slides. So if you haven't yet already subscribed to our channel, head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. We're going to post today's recording over there, as well as we have all our back catalog of past office hours sessions. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/in/Osterman. I love to stay in touch with what everyone's doing in our community. We have our weekly office hours invitation, goes out via email and iCal, and you can just subscribe to that by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. If you'd like to see what it's like to work with Cloud Posse and behind the scenes of what our solution looks like, book a time with me anytime. Head over to cloudposse.com/quiz. There's just a few scoping questions to understand kind of your situations. We can tailor what we talk about for your needs. And yeah, we'll give you a live demo of what it all looks like. Go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Talk to you all next week. Same time, same place. Adios.